Hi guys, welcome to the show. My name is Seb Ostrovich, aka the Voice of the People, and this is the Weightlifting House podcast. Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the Weightlifting House podcast with your host Seb Ostrovich, the Voice of the People, joined of course by the People Scientist Joshua Gibson and the People's original podcaster. We have Ed Baker on the show today. So for those of you who don't know, when I first started getting into weightlifting, or maybe a year or so in, I felt like I needed to get to know more people who did weightlifting, and there was no one near me who did weightlifting, so I found the podcasting world. And one of the original podcasts I stumbled upon was the Commissioners of Power, which ended all too soon, but was, whilst it was around, in my opinion, potentially the highest quality weightlifting podcast out there. Ed, I have heard your voice so many times in my headphones, and once again, I'm hearing them again in my headphones, but this time I get to see you as well. Welcome to the show. How are you doing?
Hey, I'm doing all right, Seb. Appreciate the kind words like that. That's just going down memory lane. And
yeah, I mean there were some episodes on there. I mean that Donnie Shankle one, that was fire. Did you had Alex Lee? I haven't listened to them before. You had Alex Lee, Norick,
Derek Johnson.
I mean, the Derek one is very good.
Bo
That's the only time I've
Sandoval,
ever heard Derek. Yeah. Do you have a particularly favorite episode?
So I would say just from the historical aspect of this of the sport, having Norik Vardanian on there, it was just so cool. Like, come on, that's the son of Yurik Vardanian. Mm-hmm. He got to train alongside David Rieger and all of these legends in the sport of weightlifting. So for me, that was just cool hearing kind of secondhand from Yurik's son stories about like David Rieger getting drunk the night before the World Championships, having to be carried back into the hotel, and then wins the World Championships the next day.
Right.
From a historical perspective, the Norick one, that's definitely number one on my list. I would say in terms of just enjoying the conversation, the Donnie Shankle podcast was like, me and Thomas, we recorded that one at about 10 o'clock at night, and so it's maybe around.
Because he was in Tokyo, or he wasn't in the USA, was he, at the time? I remember, yeah.
No, yeah, he was in Tokyo, and I mean, like, half the time it's cutting out, and he's like, his voice is turning robotic and stuff.
Yeah.
But I just remember, like, when we finished that podcast, it was around 11 o'clock Eastern time, and after Shankle got off, me and Thomas were like, Jesus, like, we were both ready to work out.
Yeah.
Podcast, but those are definitely the two podcasts that stand out.
It's funny because I piggybacked off your episode of Norick. I had him on the show a couple of months ago. We did one episode which was purely on his father. We just did the history of his dad's life and his competitive career, which is great. And then I just had him on to talk, about his own career and stuff. And there are a few stories that I brought up that I only knew of because of his podcast with you. So the story about his dad snatching, I think it was 160 cold, walking into the gym, sitting there, preparing himself, actually physically starting to sweat because he was really so emotionally involved in this. I brought that one up, just loads of things from the old podcast. You mentioned before we hit record that there's a slim possibility that you might potentially reboot the old Commissioners of Power. Is this rumor true, or is this what do we think about this?
Oh man, so what we were talking about before the podcast started, Thomas Lower, the other fellow Commissioner of Power, he happened to tag me in a video of him hitting a heavy clean. And so where I'm at in my training right now, I'm actually kind of in shape, and I'd like to compete at nationals this year, so I need to go and hit a qualifying total. So I commented on the post like, hey man, what would you say about having a comeback meet this year? We can reunite. And he posted something like, we'll see, commissioners reunite. And I mean, I will admit, it's just been making me think the past week or so, especially with Josh reaching out about doing a podcast. Like, man, like you said, it did end very abruptly. We had our season 2. The first episode was with Chad Vaughn, and Yeah, and I was in talks with Chad about putting on a little bit of a technique series, and yeah, it just stopped. So I don't know. I'd just be curious to see. I don't know, just to see kind of how it would be now. Just with what a different time we're in, what a different position me and Thomas are in. But I don't know. I don't know. Just for old time's sake, and just to, I don't know. Just I'm a nostalgic person, so I would,
Right.
I would humor the idea, but I would have to ask Thomas and see what he has to say. It may be a hard no for him. He may be up for it. I don't know.
Yeah, and I think it's a good jumping off point if you could kind of explain why you guys wanted to start the podcast in the first place. I think that will lead us into discussing a few of the topics we've already had planned.
Hey, perfect. Yeah, so to give just a quick backstory, I had the pleasure of being coached by weightlifting coach, authority, whatever you would want to call him, John Coffey. And he's considered one of the pioneers in women's weightlifting. And so the guy's been around weightlifting since the early 60s. And I just would always hear tidbits of knowledge about the history of the sport, old names in the sport, a person who did this, why weightlifting is in this state. And I felt like at the time, and I still feel that it's true today, that not many people seem to be interested in aside from you guys right now, they don't seem to be interested in delving into the history of the sport, like how the sport is in the state that it's in today. And like Phil Andrews right now, our current CEO, he's done a phenomenal job taking the reins back when he came on board, I believe it was in 2014, and getting it to where it is now. But I don't feel like really anyone knows who came before that. Like I mentioned the name Bob Hoffman off air. If we went to nationals right now and said the name Bob Hoffman or York Barbell, like I don't think anyone would know what those names mean. When that guy is like the father of American weightlifting, he personally funded the U.S. to go on these international trips. He employed many weightlifters at York Barbell to give them a livable wage when it was barely that, but he gave them a livable wage to be able to juggle training and working all in one. So to answer your question, we wanted to delve more into the historical side of the sport, but more into the historical side of physical culture. I think we owe it to the people who paved our sport and physical culture, the Iron Game, who paved the way. I feel like we owe it to them in a way to just know who they are.
I mean, I completely agree. I did a series on the podcast that spanned maybe 6 months, where every week I would go through the life, career, and best performance of the top 70 Sinclairs of all time, and just started. I mean, so this wasn't USA focused, and in fact, there was nobody from the USA in the list, but just trying to give some level of understanding of the context of where we are now. I mean, people look at the world of weightlifting and they say, all right, Liu Xiaojun, one of the best weightlifters, maybe the best weightlifter of all time, and you just got to pull them back and say, now hold on, like, do you know what happened in Varna in 1984? Do you know what Jurek Vardanian hit? Do you know about the 224 or Zlatev or the other comparable weightlifters, or comparable in terms of body weight? We're all standing on the shoulders of giants, and to ignore those giants below us and just consider where we are right now lacks, a pretty profound understanding of weightlifting, and doesn't really do justice to the tradition and the history of the sport. So, I mean, I love the fact that that's where you guys came from, and that was the original almost mission statement, I suppose, for what Commissioners of Power was. So, in terms of your time with John Coffey, I know that you've spoken about him. You know more about him than almost anyone, really, it seems. What was it like, starting in the sport? How did you find it? How did you find him? What was coaching like with him? Just, these kinds of stories of being with legends, the John Coffey type of legend. These are the sorts of things that I love. So anything in particular that stands out when you got to know him and how training was?
Yeah, so I mean, if I had to describe my experience with him, honestly, like what you said about sums it up. Like every day, it was like good Lord, I'm best friends with a legend. Like
Yeah.
it just blew my mind every day. I would say the first thing that really stood out to me when I first, so I'll just give you a little bit of a backstory on how I ended up at Coffey's gym.
Yeah, go for it.
So in high school, I was exposed to the sport of weightlifting. Our football coach, Stan Luttrell, at the time, he had all of the football players performing snatches and clean and jerks in the off season, and so I was one of the weakest kids on our football team. I think they grouped us into like groups of 3 or groups of 4 during weight training. We had 80 or 90 kids, and I was in the group with the weakest kids. And so none of the coaches knew my name. I was just off in the corner. We were trying to wolf up like 30 kilos and snatch it, and I had no clue how. So I was a very sloppy lifter. And so I got picked on and all of that, and so I was a little into weightlifting, even though I wasn't good at it. I would watch YouTube videos, and at the time, maybe the only videos that were out are like this Ilya Lean motivational video from the Beijing Olympics, Piros Dimas, his career, and I just remember seeing the numbers that they were hitting and comparing them to the kids that were picking on me in high school, and I'm like, wait a minute, like, of course I'm weak, but these kids, like, they're not even back squatting what these guys are snatching. Like, why, why are they looking down on me? So it just kind of became I'll show you mentality, and my goal was to be stronger than any kid in the high school. And so once I did, my goals were a little bit past that. I wanted to win the school age nationals, now known as youth nationals, and so I just kept getting more and more into weightlifting. And my senior year of high school, I had reached out to Lindenwood, and my plan was to go there on an academic scholarship and to do weightlifting. So my very last weightlifting meet in high school, I met Coach John Coffey, and the only reason I ended up speaking to him, I saw a group of women in the warm-up room, and I thought they were high schoolers. So I went up and talked to them because they were all wearing shirts. I didn't see the front of them at the time, but the front was a classic Coffey's gym with the weightlifter of Sibby Flowers or Robin Goat or Kelly Rexford on the front. But on the back, it read, "Train like hell, you'll get there." And I just thought that was the coolest thing ever. I was like, I got to have one of these shirts.
I love that.
So I walked up to the group, was talking to them, chatted with them, and then of course comes moseying along John Coffey and his characteristic shuffling. He didn't really walk; he just kind of shuffled everywhere. But,
like one of those wind-up toys that just does that.
Yeah, just very, very, very slow. So long story short, I shook hands with him, and I wanted to get one of these shirts. And so one of his lifters said, "Yeah, just come by the gym one day, and you can buy a shirt." So my high school is maybe about an hour from his gym in Marietta. So I ended up making the drive. I get there, and of course, when I get there, they don't have any shirts. I don't know why they even told me to come over there. Like, they'd been sold out for months. But within 10 minutes of being there, like, I was just kind of blown away of the understanding that this guy had about weightlifting. Now, I didn't know anything at all about his accolades, his achievements in the sport, the achievements that his lifter had. But one thing that was really cool to me is just how down to earth and approachable he was talking about training. Like, I had this notion at the time that if I wanted to get a little bit in a strongman, and I had this whole idea in high school of, well, if muscle confusion is true, if I do something similar to a clean and jerk, like a log clean, then it'll carry over to the clean and jerk. And I just remember as soon as that came out of my mouth in his gym, he just says, "That's bullshit." I distinctly remember that. But then he told me why and why that didn't work. The basis of training the nervous system and weightlifting and so on and so forth. And but at the time, I was battling some really bad patellar tendonitis in both of my knees. Our coach had us squatting heavy about 5 days a week. We were maxing on the lifts just about every day. And so after about 2 weeks of training at Coffey's gym, one day John pulls me to the side and pretty much tells me, look, you just need to get over the tendonitis. Like, the sooner you get rid of it, the better. You're still young. You have your whole weightlifting career ahead of you. Just best thing you can do is take 2 months off. What's a couple of months in the rest of your life? So I did. And during that summer, I got cold feet. I was like, I don't want to move to a private college in Missouri to do weightlifting. So I ended up going to a college right here in Georgia. And then I walked back in his doors one day, and he was just like dumbfounded, like, wow, like you actually took my advice. And later down so like John is known as a women's coach, and someone asked him at one point, like, John, like, you mainly coach women. I know you don't like coaching men anymore. Why did you coach Edward? And what he told them is, well, it's because he actually listened. Because I guess he's dealt with plenty of guys that have had egos. I mean, he's still coached male Olympians as well. But I mean, I'll be the first to say that guys can be hard-headed and hard to take instruction. But so he ended up taking me on. And so one thing that I had mentioned before, like, I just had no clue what John had done in the sport. Coffey's gym, I just thought it was an older man who had a gym, but then I ended up finding out secondhand what he had actually done. Just hearing other people say oh, he coached the last world champion, and I was like, what? Like, I had no clue. Like, he didn't carry himself that way at all. He was just a normal person. He loved snatching and clean and jerking. He would be just as excited for his best female lifter to hit a PR as he was this newbie that had been there for 2 weeks hitting a PR. He just loved weightlifting. He loved the sport, and that was so cool to me. So fast forward, I end up going to my first junior nationals with him. And I remember it just being such a cool feeling of going to this meet, walking through the hotel, looking down at the warm-up area, and all of these coaches going out of their way to shake his hand, like, just like that he's like a big deal. And that just blew me away. Like, I still at the time don't think I'd realized who exactly he was in the sport, but I mean, come on, that's a cool feeling. Like, you're best for the legend, it was sweet. That's the only way to describe it.
Yeah. So what was, presumably, so you'd done a few years of training. You'd done a little bit of this before you met him. And you mentioned that you'd been doing some, basically maxing out every day with your high school coach or whoever it was. What was training like with John? What did he have you do? Did he kind of look at you and go, you know what, technique is bad, let's work on this? Or was it, let's get very strong? Or, like, how did that turn out for the first few months?
And just quickly before you answer, when you showed up to his gym, what were your numbers? Like, where were you at in terms of your development as a weightlifter?
Yeah.
So my best lifts were 122 and 162. And so, John, let me think of the questions that you guys asked again real quick. Okay. So it was 122 and 162. But around the time that I came in, my numbers were starting to go down because my knees were just hurting so bad. Like, I couldn't sit down and stand up out of a chair without them hurting, let alone snatch and clean and jerk. So when I came back to his gym, the first thing I remember, I had no clue how to get my back arched. Like, my original coaches, like, I would hear them say all the time, like, get tight, get set off the floor. But I did, like, all I would do was, I couldn't feel actually manipulating my back to actually get it to go between flexion or extension. I would just tense up even more, like I'm doing a plank. And that was the very first thing that he had me change. Is like, this is the very first part you should start in teaching a new weightlifter. Teach them how to arch their back. So he pulled out this stool that he had me sit on the edge of the stool, and taught me how to arch my back, just going between slouching my back and arching my back. He got that from Tommy Kono. You can find that in his first weightlifting book. That's the first chapter, the back arch. But so Yeah, so my technique was pretty atrocious when I first came into Coffey's gym. My back was rounded. I was yanking the bar off the floor, and it was really just I was pulling and praying. On my power jerk, my feet would jump so wide out on the catch that, say, if you're on a 4-foot slab of wood, my feet would land on the rubber. So my feet were going wider than 4 feet on my heavier attempts.
And then that just limits depth at that point, doesn't it? I mean, once you've gone as wide as you can, there's no squatting down.
Yep. Oh yeah. It's and half the time my feet would slip on the recovery too from how wide they were. So just not very viable. Yeah. So with John, to sum up his approach with me, it's what I needed exactly. Like the first year that I was with him. Even though I had taken a couple of months off, it's not like the tendonitis just magically disappeared. So I'm sure I have the routine somewhere, but I recall he was maybe having me squat clean and jerk once a week, and I would do full squat snatches once or twice a week. But then the rest of the week was power versions of the lift.
Right. Okay.
And so I was a 94 at the time, and once I got up to 105. He decreased the amount of times that I squatted a week. Like I had mentioned, my first coach had us squatting about 5 days a week. When I first started working with John, it went to 2 days a week. And then once I went up to 105, I never had trouble standing up out of a clean. So then it went to 1 day a week, front and back squats on the same day. And my legs got stronger than they'd ever been and quicker than they'd ever been once I moved to squatting once a week.
That's interesting. So just to jump in before I get lost and forget all those interesting points, you were initially just doing the lifts in full once a week. Was that because of your patellar tendonitis and it was just a way for you to not end up going through too much knee flexion, or was it actually that's how he likes to coach people?
No. So that was specific for me to limit, like you mentioned, to limit the amount of times that I went down onto a squat. Tendonitis, first and foremost, is an overuse injury. So the first way to address it, use the joint less. So that's exactly what he had me do. And so I talked about this with Ray Jones a little in the last article I did with them, CJ Cummings' coach. If you think about it, if weightlifter just about squats every day, not just when they're picking a bar up out of the rack from their shoulders and from their back and squatting it, but each time you do a squat snatch, a squat clean, those all have squatting movements to them. He purposefully limited it so that I had a good space of days in between the times that I squatted. You have the squatting motion, then you have the days after to recover from it. And that's what he felt was best for me to control the tendonitis, which I think was the best thing I could have done.
Yeah, and I know someone like a Bob Takano has everyone pretty much do a version of the lifts each day. So with John, do you snatch or clean and jerk or close variation every training day you're in, or is it kind of just vary?
So for most of John's lifters, they may be trained about 3 or 4 days a week. So John was very traditional in that he liked to start just about every training session with a snatch type movement. I think I looked a little bit into Takano's way, and he believes like just training one specific movement pattern and all very close variations all on the same day. But for John, I remember when he was teaching me how to program for people when I was getting more into coaching, John liked starting out planning the week with applying where the snatches are going to go throughout the week. He likes to start out with snatch exercises, whereas a weightlifting coach like Ben Green, a coach down here who's just as accomplished as John, he likes starting out building a program by planning where the squats are going to go and then go from there. But
so was John's reasoning basically that the snatch is the most technically demanding lift, so we need to find a way that we can place them and have them spread out enough and then work out where the really fatigue building exercises will go to impact the least on the snatch?
If I recall correctly, John, he felt, and I'm sure most coaches feel this way, that the snatch should be performed with a little bit more regularity. And since you're not handling as much weight, you can perform it with more regularity. And on the days that the clean and jerk was the emphasis, he felt that the snatch served as a good warm up for the clean and jerk. You're just handling lighter weights. You're warming up the pull. You're warming up the squat. So even if the clean and jerk was the emphasis, a lot of the times he would like to start out the workout with a lighter snatch or a lighter power snatch workout or snatches off the blocks, even if the clean and jerk was the focus for the day. That's what I recall, because most of the weightlifters that he coached, they were full-time students, had full-time jobs, and so they didn't have the luxury of having 5 or 6 day a week training plans to where they could just divvy it up and have it become this day is a snatch day, this day is a clean and jerk day, so on and so forth. So they all were a little bit more consolidated in that sense. I suppose.
And so how did that squatting work? Because I mean, there are a few programs out there where people front and back squat the same day. I think I've never looked at it, but I think the Hatch squat program, Josh, you probably know, that's got that. I spent a lot of time with Glenn, and Glenn has done a few times he's tried doing back squats and front squats on the same day. But how did John's program go with that? Was it just, if it's one day of squatting, we're just going to do a ridiculous amount of work, or exhaust the front squat until it's done and then move to back squat? I mean, how did that look? Rep range, intensity, that sort of thing.
Oh, we ran Smolov on both squats on the same day. No, I'm kidding.
I thought you were serious for a second.
No. So I did it a couple of different ways. I reached out to Artie Dressler at one point, and I had him help me come up with modifying the Russian squat routine, which you use the back squat, and I had him help me modify it to where I could make it more suitable for the front squat. And so for a little while, I just kind of had my own version of the Russian squat routine for the front squat. I would run that one day a week, and on the same day after I finished off the sets and reps for the front squat, I would drop the weight down and maybe work up to some moderate weights on some back squats. And honestly, when I mentioned to you, my legs got strong and as quickly as they ever had, just squatting once a week. It was funny because it was just a very simple approach. I remember I'd started out with it was 165 or 175 that I was doing for 4 sets of 4 on the front squat. And afterwards, I'll drop the weight down and maybe do 3 sets of 3 on the back squat with a lighter weight to get my legs a little bit more loosened up. But the goal, it was just a very linear approach. I would just go up 5 kilos a week, 5 kilos a week. And John would always say the trick to getting strong is seeing how long you can ride a linear progression, how long you can ride an increase, even if that means you have to only start making 2.5 kilogram jumps between each week, just stretching out that progression to as long of one as possible. So once I got to 190 kilos for 4 sets of 4, I had to start going up by 2.5 kilograms. And I don't know what ended up happening, but I'm trying to think. Yeah, it's funny because the first day I ever tripled 200 on the front squat, Nat Aram actually happened to be in Coffey's that day. And this was when he was just getting on the scene. Hook grip was just now becoming a thing. I think he had gone to Paris for the World Championships a little while before, but he was coming to Savannah, Georgia for a wedding and wanted to come and see Coffey's gym in person. So he actually took some pictures of me front squatting 200 kilos for the first time. But it just blew my mind that such a simple approach could get my legs as strong as it did. A lot of people look into variations, like maybe doing tempo squats, 1 1/4 squats, or thinking that there may be a magic scheme of sets and reps. But it was just very simple. Try to do a little more than last week for a few sets of 4. I can't do 4s anymore. Let's just go to triples, cut the reps down. And
so now, sorry, go on.
The back squat was really more of an afterthought of I'll just get more volume in, but the front squat was the focus.
So you coach, you have Voodoo Weightlifting, and when you coach those guys there to get stronger in the squat, is there any level of maybe understanding that you think, okay, you know what, I to some extent built to squat, I didn't need as much squat work as maybe some other people, and therefore I'm going to give them a more complicated approach? Or do you just keep it very simple for everyone? And is that it? Do you think that that's fair? Do you think that's true that you have an ability to squat maybe better than most?
I I would be reluctant to say that because I don't like complimenting myself at all. But I guess that's I have to acknowledge that that is true. Like if I can get by squatting once a week and getting stronger, then I definitely have an advantage over that. Most people's legs would get weaker if they squatted once a week.
Yeah.
And just being honest about my coaching, I definitely lean towards being too conservative and pushing the squat at the detriment of my lifters at points, because I have that bias towards not having to really think about it too much. But with that being said, when assigning a program for a lifter, determining how much they should do during the week, I always like to teeter on the side to being overly conservative at the beginning. And if it's too easy, they don't feel like they're getting enough squat volume, or the intensity isn't heavy enough, then I'll adjust it from there. But I'd prefer too light at first versus too heavy at first. Yeah. But with that being said, on and off, I've been working with this athlete, this 49-kilo lifter, Carrie Keegan, and she won the Collegiate Worlds back when it was in Merida, Mexico. So I guess 2016, 2017. Yeah, it's 2016. And her best back squat was 118 kilograms, and she had been used to squatting pretty often, but the past year or so, she's been dealing with some back issues. I'm not sure if it's the L4 and L5. Sometimes her knees flare up. So she was only squatting about twice a week, which is definitely on the more conservative side for a lifter that small. But it was the nice validation for me when she ended up hitting a PR double on the squat with, what would 250 pounds be? I work with her, and she
114.
113, yeah.
113,
yeah. Yeah, and that was a PR for her, a PR double. She did it beltless, and I remember her saying, like, wow, like, it just blows my mind that my legs can actually get stronger without having to run myself down in the ground in squats. One way John liked to look at training is, well, okay, like, say you don't have the luxury, and that this doesn't just apply to the squat, but say training days in general. Like, say if you're only able to train 3 or 4 days a week when originally you were training 5 or 6 days a week. A lot of people get down in the dumps about that. Maybe they're getting older and their body can't recover as quickly, or maybe they have a job that just doesn't allot the amount of time to be able to train that often. Well, John would say, well, if you're training less, or you're doing some less each movement, or you have that training day, you're able to put much more energy into the movement on that particular day. It's had that much more time to recover. So that's the way that I perceived the squat. When I was squatting 5 days a week, I just felt horrible every day that I ended up squatting. And once the day started going down, I just felt very energetic. I felt like the movement was just a lot more powerful when I was squatting less often versus more often.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that. And Seb, I don't know if you agree, but because I'm not a natural squatter, I tend to program those lifts with a higher frequency, just kind of naturally, and it seems to work, and that kind of reinforces my bias a little bit. But it's cool that people have a similar approach in assimilating their past experiences with their coaching preferences. Seb, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I just think I wish I could do that. If I squat once a week and I come back, it's like I don't remember how to squat. I feel like a baby giraffe. My knees are touching. My back is rounded. I haven't even put on the first slab yet, and I'm still I'm getting pinned. So there are a bunch of things I've written down during this that I want to kind of touch on. I guess one of the obvious ones is what I've wanted to ask for a while is why you don't split jerk. And I thought maybe that would be a more recent thing. And then suddenly I hear that you're saying that when you first turned up to Coffey's gym, you were not split jerking then either. So why did you not split jerk, and what's the rationale?
So you could find an older video of me from my sophomore year in high school, me clean and jerking. It's like 100 kilograms. the whole lift is atrocious. It's like a rounded back deadlift plus a reverse curl. I just hop under the bar.
I want to find this. Where is it?
It's
On Instagram or?
It's on YouTube. You just search
All
Ed
right,
Baker clean and jerk 100 kilos. But
I'm gonna look after this.
yeah. And I'm split jerking at the time, and so my split jerk, just to kind of describe it to you, my pelvis is like pointed straight towards the ground when I hit the split. My back is super arched. I'm like super bowed back into it. In my back foot, it doesn't go back or slightly out. It like shoots almost straight to the side and it's completely flat. So it just looks god awful.
Yeah.
And so when I got the Coffeys, I maybe started training there back in August of that year, and the Junior Nationals coming up was in February. So John's rationale is, why don't we just stick with a power jerk until then, and then after the Junior Nationals, we'll explore the split jerk and see if we can teach you how to do it properly. And so Junior Nationals passes, and then so he's teaching me how to split jerk. And he taught me the footwork, he taught me how to position myself under the bar, and I could do so with about 40 kilos, not 140, but 40 kilograms. And once I would put any weight on the bar past 60 kilos, my body would just revert right back to just the ugly bowed back arch, foot shooting out to the side, landing flat, hip shooting back. And so after a couple of weeks of it, John was like, oh, well, maybe you just weren't born to split jerk. And so then the next step was, well, if you're not going to split jerk and you're going to power jerk, you're going to have to drive the bar higher. So we just need to work the piss out of your legs. So then that was a goal, and that was another rationale to try to get my front squat up as strong as I could. I remember reaching out to lifters like Kara Heads. I tried messaging Kakiashvili on Facebook, and he was actually really helpful. Yeah. Oh, he sure was.
Well, in terms of how to front squat, or
how strong to get my legs, advice on my power jerk.
I mean, best power jerker of all time. It's not a bad person to reach out to.
Oh yeah. And him and Dimos's coach, Christos Iakovou, him and John were actually friends. Christos, he had a pizza parlor down in Atlanta, and every so often he would come back to Atlanta to oversee it. And at one point, Dimas had to come to the United States to get rotator cuff surgery. When would that have been? I guess like leading up to the 2000 Olympics, because I recall one of the announcers mentioning that he was coming back from that. And so Dimas came into Coffey's and did some muscle snatches like right before he got rotator cuff surgery. But so a few years back, Christos emailed John and said, like, hey, John, I just wanted to get back in touch with you. And I guess whatever lawsuit or legal issues that they were having to deal with for the big Greek doping scandal was over, and he was cleared. So he was just catching up with John. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to use this as an opportunity to get him to look at my lifts and get some advice from him. And he was someone that was incredibly helpful too.
Yeah. That's insane. I actually added Christos on Facebook just because I wanted to feel a little bit more in with the Greek Dream Team. So I had him on. I did a podcast with Valerius Leonidas, which is pretty cool. And I've not been able to yet really get in touch with Dimas, which is a shame. But at some point, I got to get Dimas on the show because he'd be awesome to have on. But I mean, that's an amazing connection that Coffey's gym has with the Greeks. I mean, that's pretty astonishing. So what were your numbers in the jerk and the front squat? Because you were the 2014 and 15 collegiate national champ, right? So you had some big numbers. I've seen some big jerks on your Instagram page before.
Yeah, I could definitely do a lot better on the jerk when I would just stay in the jerk blocks, unrack it, get set, and then go, versus obviously standing up out of a clean and jerking it, or unracking it out of a rack and jerking it. But let's see.
So off the blocks?
Yeah, off the blocks, from in front, I had jerked 203 right before nationals.
As a 105, right?
Yes. Which I was probably weighing more close to 115. I would have some pretty hard weight cuts back then. But Yeah, so I 203 from in front, and I'm kicking myself for not trying more. But it was about 2 weeks out from nationals, and it was,
Yeah, no point.
yeah, it's like
Yeah.
it's just an ego trip from there.
Yeah.
From behind the neck, I had done 212 and a half. We had put 1.25 kilo plates on, and that was definitely about a limit weight. Probably the more impressive jerk I would say I did was a 200 double from behind the neck.
Wow.
And the only reason, so I ended up re-racking it after each
I was going to
rep.
say, did you re-rack or did you drop onto the blocks? The re-rack.
Yeah.
Cool.
So I went to UGA, the University of Georgia, for college, and they didn't allow us to drop weights. They had bumper plates, platforms, and everything, but you couldn't drop the weight. So one day I was having a bad day. I went in there and was working up on some heavy behind the neck jerks and just worked up to 200. But I mean, I don't know. It was the hardest part. Obviously, was re-racking it. If you watch the first rep of the video, it just looks like my whole body is just going into shock from how hard the bar lands on me.
Yeah.
But for me, I would say it was a lot harder to do 200 twice and re-rack it each time than doing 212 was out of the blocks, just because I didn't have to re-rack it.
Right.
Yeah, and
then in terms of just one thing quickly, Josh, in terms of the front squat, because I'm interested in what you got that up to. Josh, I'm sorry. What did you end up front squatting?
Same story as the jerk. I had to stop right before nationals. It was about a month out, and I had to start focusing more on the lifts. I was working up on doubles each week, and I finished off with 240 a double on the front. And after that, it was, well, what's the point kind of deal. I'm front squatting, 50 kilos more than I'm clean and jerking, so I should probably focus more on the lifts.
Right.
Yeah, and after talking to such prolific power jerkers, what were the coaching points or the teaching points that you were able to glean from them and apply that really took you to the next level?
Let's see. So I remember when I showed Dimas one of my power jerk videos, he pointed out that my hips were shooting back when I was recovering from the power jerk. And that was important to me because I always had thought, I'd always been taught, and I'd only been thinking about the dip and drive for the jerk and receiving it, that it needed to be like even more so vertical than the split jerk would, or just falling right in that center of balance. But I really didn't have much consideration for recovering from a power jerk, even though it's like as simple as just straightening the legs and waist out. I just never thought about it. And so what I would do when I would recover from my power jerks, especially when I would get driven down, the first thing that would shoot up were my hips, so my back angle would kind of incline a little bit forward.
So you straighten the legs and then the back.
Yeah, it was one then the other kind of deal. Yeah. And I just never thought about that, and that definitely helped me a lot. Not just being particular about getting the bar overhead, but just that final lockout, which when you're performing a max effort attempt, that could be the difference between a make and a miss.
Yeah.
I got those, and John was very big on this too, but Christos kind of reaffirmed this. Just doing complexes to fatigue yourself before actually doing jerks. Christos gave me this pretty simple complex. It was like a 2 power clean plus 2 front squat plus 2 jerks, just getting a lot of work in before doing jerks. And then by the time you get to the final jerk, of course, you power cleaned it twice, you front squatted twice to fatigue the legs. And that's, I guess that makes a good jerker, but a good power jerker in particular, like being able to perform jerks on fatigued legs. So from Christos, just kind of implementing more stuff like that. I would also try front squatting heavy before I would do jerks. This is another way to fatigue my legs. And Kakiashvili, I would have to think a little more. I know, again, I recall he was very helpful when I would send him videos. He would give me like full-on analyses and whatnot. But I remember he hated when I would use jerk blocks to do jerks. Like he would always say that they were dangerous and whatnot, and I should do them out of a rack. And for whatever reason, that's what's standing out to me. Usually, it would almost get him mad that I was doing it.
Yeah. Firstly, does Christos Yakovu speak English?
So when he Shoot, yeah. When he would answer emails back, if I recall correctly, he said that he would get his wife to translate for him.
Right. Okay.
And when I tried to get him on the Commissioners of Power podcast, he joked and said like, "Oh, maybe you should get my wife on the podcast. She would be better than me." But then pretty much said, "But no, really, like I don't want to do a podcast." But yeah, if my understanding was he was sitting there and his wife was sitting there and she was translating what I was saying to him, and then he in turn was getting her to translate it to him.
Yeah.
So,
that's awesome. Did he ever say why, or do you know why it was that, of that Greek Dream Team, 2 of them were power jerkers and 2 of them were some of the best power jerkers ever? Because, I mean, Dimas obviously split jerked early on. There's that famous video of him in Barcelona where he's split jerking after the power clean, and Randy Strawson is just being savage about American weightlifting during that video. But you know the bit.
I know exactly.
But did any feel for why that was a thing? They power jerked?
I'd never spoken to them about it, but my understanding is that they were already power jerking before they started working with Christos. I'm not sure if that's entirely true.
Yeah.
But I want to say, like, because was he still competing for Albania? No, he was for Greece at that Olympics, and I want to say a year or 2 before that at the Europeans he was competing as Piro Dima.
Right.
For Albania.
Yeah.
I want to say at the time that he was power jerking, but I may be completely wrong. And I think on YouTube there is an older video of Kakishvili of him over the years, and it looks like I want to say that he was already power jerking because he was Georgian and then competed for Greece. So if I just a shot in the dark guess for Kakishvili, I think he may have already been power jerking. Dimas, I'm not sure, sir. I'm not sure why he split jerked, or I could have.
Yeah, because I've definitely seen Dimas jerking after he left Albania. But I don't know what that was. Maybe it was just a preferencing or a consistency thing, or maybe it was Christos said something. I don't really know. So while we're on the topic of some of these sort of all-time legends, do you have any favorites in the sport? Favorite athletes?
Favorite
lifters to watch or motivate you, or?
I mean, shoot, like there are just so many great weightlifters right now for me. Yeah. If I had to go a little bit back into some older lifters, Alexander Kurlovich, like he was just, I don't know, he's just definitely one of the legends to me.
He's my favorite super.
Oh yeah, like just from his demeanor, how he approaches the bar, his mannerisms, and the way he would decisively win. And it still irks me that at the 87 Worlds that they didn't give him the down signal on that jerk. Like
that was harsh. That happened twice, that he hit something over at around 265-ish, or maybe even 266, one of them. And both times, like, they called him for a press out or they didn't give him a down signal. And it was like a conspiracy against Kurlovich. It's a weird thing.
At the 96 Olympics, one of his snatches got turned. He didn't get the snatch for that very reason, too.
Really?
He kept rotating, and they didn't give him the down signal to where he eventually had to drop it.
The fact that he was still competing in the 96 Olympics is absurd. Like, his career was so long. I went through and worked out how many times some of the greatest supers have totaled 460 or above. And I think it's something like, I think Taranenko had done it maybe 5 times, and Lash has already done it 6 times, and Kurlovich is like 12. He's so far ahead. Yeah, I think Rezazadeh was 4 or 5, Salimi 2 or 3. Like, Kurlovich is just so far ahead in terms of his consistency with those kind of numbers. It's insane.
I didn't even realize that, and I want to tell you a cool story about Kurlovich. I met him at the 2015 Worlds in Houston. And I had printed out a picture of him from the 94 Worlds in Istanbul, a picture of him mid-pull and a snatch. It was one of Bruce Clemens' photos. And so I walked up to him and had a Sharpie and asked him if he could sign it. And he just looked at it and was just like confused. And he was like, "What competition?" Like he just had no clue what it was from. And I was like, "Istanbul." And he's like, he just kept looking at it and looks at me and says, I've never seen this before in my life.
Wow.
But it was just like my thought is, God, like he's probably been competed in so many meets. It's all just a blur to him.
Yeah.
But yeah, he was a super friendly guy. So he's definitely one of my favorites. I would have to say, one of my all-time favorites now is Niku Vlad. Like, obviously is he? If I recall correctly, he is the heaviest man to have snatched double body weight.
Yes, he is. Yeah, 200.5. Yeah.
Yeah, weighing like a shade under 100 kilograms.
Yeah.
And
that was in '87, I think. Yeah.
And but what really stands out to me with him, like I don't just like weightlifters based off of how good of lifters they were, but what kind of people that they are outside of the platform too. And so he was at that Worlds as well.
Yeah.
And I got him to sign a few pictures, and he was just super kind. He was looking at the pictures, and he asked me, like, is there any way that I could buy some of these from you? And I was like, huh? And he said, yeah, so like over the years, I just gave away all the photographs that I had of myself lifting to my friends, and now I don't have any for myself. So I had gotten someone to run to a CVS and make copies of the pictures and gave them to him. And so then the next day, he was sitting there watching the Romanian team in the audience. So I walked up to him and was like, hey, Niku, do you mind if I asked you a couple of questions about lifting? He's like, yeah, sure, sit down. And so we spent that session just talking about lifting, showing him videos of my snatch and my clean and jerk, and asking for advice, and asked him about how Romanian deadlift should be performed, since the exercise was popularized, or I guess the Romanian came from him and Dragomir and whatnot. But
it was just... Supposedly that was when he came over to the OTC in I think it was the early 90s, wasn't it? And Matt Foreman, is that who it was? He was training at the OTC then. Yeah, he was talking about when Nicky Vlad came in and was training, and then started doing... I think Vlad had maybe worked up to 300 for a triple. I think I recall reading that was the most he'd maybe ever done for 3, and it's just... I mean, what do you say about that? That is some serious strength.
I could believe it. John had said when he saw him in the world in a training hall that he was doing about 600 pounds, like 270-ish kilos for sets of 5. And one thing that John had remarked was like he was only lowering the bar down to the center of his kneecap. So that's just whereas a lot of times RDL's performed, I think,
all the way,
some coaches teach you to tap the plates on the ground. So I just wanted to ask him, like, how did you actually perform it? But yeah, so Niku, top of my list, because kind of going hand in hand with why I like John so much. Niku, just a super approachable guy, super friendly, just super conversational. Didn't give off any pretense that he was one of the greats, of the sport. One of the best weightlifters in history. But he was definitely up there. So off the top of my list, those two names definitely stand out. And David Rieger, I mean, he was just like, in a way, like the Arnold Schwarzenegger of weightlifting, just like his, just like very maverick approach. Approach to the platform. Like even the way that he would drop the snatches, like turn the bar back, raise the bar head, get a narrow grip, then drop it.
That's very cool.
Yeah, just a super cool guy.
No, I mean, all of those 3 athletes I have in, because I turned that podcast series into this book, and one of the issues was I needed to get photos for all of the athletes, and I approached Bruce Clemens, where you got those photos from, and he is just the nicest guy, and he was awesome, and he showed me where all the photos were. We went through and chose them all, and I got the rights for them, and it was amazing. But Bruce has, like, without those photos, I mean, so much of the history would be lost in many ways. I mean, the fact that Nicky Vlad hadn't seen those photos of himself lifting, but presumably they're on Flickr on Bruce's page is crazy. But no, it's cool. It's so cool that you got to meet them.
No, it was just like, I mean, you've only seen. It's just like now, if you were to see, like, think about the way that someone lights up when they see Matty Rogers in person. Like if you go to competitions, like I almost feel slightly bad for seeing, like, right after she's weighed in and people are coming up and asking, to get her autograph or take her picture. But I mean, that's how I felt seeing these, seeing Kurlovich in person, seeing Niku Vlad, in person, so on and
Yeah.
so forth. Like it's just like, wow, I've just seen so many videos of them. Like I've heard stories about them. I've watched documentaries about them, and
Yeah.
now I get to see them in person.
Yeah.
And yeah, like you mentioned, Bruce Clemens, like he definitely, it's great that we had a person like him around to just document like all of these lifters and just taking all of those pictures. I went to about every World Championships for probably
time.
for a good span of years, and they're excellent quality. It wasn't just an amateur guy. Like they look amazing even now.
Yeah.
So yeah,
For
like
sure.
and at Coffey's, like all of the walls were decorated with photos, and probably 90% of those photos were Bruce Clemens photos.
Yeah. That's awesome.
Yeah.
I mean, no offense to Matty Rogers, but it's certainly cooler, I think, to see Nicky Vlad at a competition. At least for me, but you know.
Yeah, they're all excellent lifters. I'm a fan of them all, but for me it was just like I mean, those were at the time when I got into weightlifting, like really seeing these older videos, like that is how I got into the sport, and you know, it was just they're like legends. They're like legends of the sport. So I don't know. It was just cool seeing them in person. Like you see someone on a video over and over again, or hear them referenced, but then like actually getting to see them in person. It's just a whole different thing. And for them to all be very approachable and down to earth, like that's what puts them up there for me. Like I've met a handful of lifters that weren't so kind, and you know maybe they were having a bad day or something, but Niku Vlad and all of them, super cool.
Yeah.
Georgie Azanidze, also a very down-to-earth guy.
Yeah,
Also
who beat DMAS in 2004. Yeah. See, I'd love to speak to him because, I mean, he went from being an amazing athlete to an amazing coach. And that's pretty rare to see, you know, to go from being Olympic champion to coaching Lasha Talakadze is a crazy story. Yeah, I gotta speak with him one day. Josh, you've been trying to get in to say something for a while. I can see you leaning in to say something, and I just jump in ahead of you. So go on.
Yeah, just kind of piggybacking off that question of your favorite weightlifter, what about your favorite moment in weightlifting? Maybe favorite competition or training moment, something that really sticks out and you find yourself going back to watch it or think about it.
I'm gonna shoot. In terms of my own athletic achievements, it would be a toss-up between the senior nationals that I medaled in the snatch. If I would have hit a clean and jerk, I think I would have medaled, but I didn't, so I didn't get a medal. But that was just actually getting a medal at a senior nationals. The 2014 collegiate nationals was pretty special to me. I had been putting together a weightlifting club at the University of Georgia, and it's a hassle and a half. Like I don't know how I did it at the time, but we ended up sending a smaller men and women's team and a co-ed team, which really just the same people on the men and women's team. And the men and women's team, we ended up winning because Lindenwood and East Tennessee, they only set a co-ed entry, but our co-ed team actually got second. Lindenwood won first, of course. UGA got second, and East Tennessee got third or fourth. And so that was a cool moment to me. Like, hey, we're just a bunch of rednecks from Georgia, just, kind of doing weightlifting recreationally in a CrossFit or in our recreational center. And we ended up beating a school that is, it's like considered an Olympic training site that grants scholarships to already accomplished weightlifters. That was super cool to me. In that same year, that was the first year I won the collegiate nationals, and I qualified for the collegiate world team. So it was just like, I don't know what more I could have asked for from that competition.
Yeah.
Like, hey, I won. I made it on the collegiate world team. This is awesome. Our men and women's team won.
Seventh, right? Was it seventh?
Yeah, seventh.
Yeah.
I can't recall if it was like out of 13 or 14 or whatnot. But yeah, it was, and that was I will say that was a pretty stacked collegiate.
Well, that's what I wanted to ask. Were there any big names in your session?
None in mine. I think the guy who won, he was a Turkish lifter. I want to say he did around 160 and 200, so pretty decently up there. a South Korean hit maybe like 155 and 190 something, around the range of that. But there were just a lot of people up like at the top 5 or whatnot, kind of battling for those podium spots. And then 6th and 7th, well, I was 7th, and then right above me was this Australian 105, and I went 3 for 6. So it was like there was this, and I made a stupid jump from 178 to 187 on my last attempt, and it was just a god awful like I hardly even got the bar to my shoulders, but yeah, so it was like everyone else vying for one of the medals, and then me and this Australian guy.
Yeah. So now that you're here, hoping to make the comeback, what are you hoping to achieve? I mean, is it medaling at a certain competition? Is it certain numbers? What's the plan now as you come back into the competitive world?
Well, the first goal, like, I want to get back. I want to compete at the nationals this year. Yeah. And so I have a meet coming up next Saturday, and I have to hit the numbers to get the qualifying total to go. As larger scope, I would consider myself finally in okay shape. I want to beat my old self. I think about the best numbers that I hit, and 10 years down the road, if someone were to ask me, like, hey, what was your best snatching clean and jerk? If I were to tell them what my best numbers are right now, I wouldn't be able to honestly look at myself and say, like, hey, I really got all out of myself that I could have. And I don't want to have to live with that down the road. I know I'm capable of more, so I'm going to just give it an honest shot, just train methodical, and beat my old self. That's a big goal. I just want to be better than I've ever been. I don't care how it places me at this meet coming up or a meet down the road. As long as I just keep beating myself, then I'll be happy. So that's the focus, and the way me and John would always talk, and he always thought I was going to do my best lifting like when I was getting close to 30. So just by virtue of me not hammering it hard every day, it's, I'm not squatting as frequently, I'm not snatching heavy or clean and jerking heavy as frequently as people normally do, so the career is probably going to be stretched out a little bit longer. So
smart. Yeah. It's an interesting thing. I've heard John Bros talking about it before, where it's, at some point you are going to hit the heaviest snatch that you're ever going to hit, and it's going to be the last one, and then you have to live with that for then 50, 60 years. You have to live with those numbers, and every time someone says to you, what were your numbers, you have to make sure that you've done enough work that you feel okay every single time saying, 50-90 or 20-40 or whatever it is. You have to be okay to say it. So you better well make the most of the time that you have right now and be proud of what you've done. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And like, I think about the numbers that I hit, and if critiquing myself, like, I was really halfway training. I would find excuses. I would take John's approach of like just doing just as much as you need to do to get strong and not too much more. I would kind of run with that. I would kind of run with this conservative approach and find ways to justify, well, I've already done one working set, and that's where you get the most training stimulus, so I'll just forego the second and third setter. Well, it's probably actually better I don't do this accessory work because I'm feeling a little bit run down, and I'll be more fresh for my next session. And then so it just turned into just me being lazy, and again, just my heavy days, of course, I would go heavy, but on my light days, I might be power snatching like 50%. 40 or 50% of my one rep max snatch, and it's like, come on, like, I know I'm tired, but that's just like, if I'm doing that all the time, I'm sandbagging at it.
Right. Yeah. That's kind of interesting you brought that up, because the question I really want to ask is how you've gone away from what you've learned from John Coffey. So being coached by him for as long as you have been, what you've maybe not seen has worked better, but what has tended to work differently in a way that you kind of suits you and your coaching style?
So I would say, so with that being, before I answer this, me and John, I think we're similar in the sense of like, well, he isn't a super organized guy, so I'm not a super organized guy. And he, like, I like comparing someone like John to a person like Takano. Takano is very meticulous, his training plans are planned out for 8 to 12 weeks, whereas John, like, I could pull out one of his old training logs that he had for one of his lifters. Like, it's just a really small spiral notebook, and he would record people's training for each day and each week. And on the back side of each page, he may have thoughts of what he wants that lifter to do the next week, but it's more or less like just a general idea, and he doesn't really decide it until that particular day, what exactly they're going to be doing, how exactly they go. So that approach is similar. I like having a general idea of training, but just kind of base it off of how the lifter is feeling for that day, asking my lifters as soon as they walk in, hey, how do you feel? And observing their warm-up, seeing how are they moving, is a bar moving quick, does their pull look a little bit fatigued? So it's similar in that sense. In terms of being different, one thing that stands out to me, and this, when I teach the jerk, I like focusing on the footwork for the jerk first, and I acquired that from Artie Dressler. I've known him for many years. He's been a very supportive man to me and has helped me a lot too. And he wanted to try to get me to learn how to split jerk. And so I went up to New York a couple years back and visited. And he's saying, like, look, like, I'm not saying you have to change. I just want you to humor the idea. I think, you could be an even better clean and jerker if you just learn how to split jerk. But hey, even if you don't use this, you can use this with your athletes. So just taking a more of a primitive approach to teaching the jerk by having an athlete just drilling footwork over and over and over again. I can't completely recall with how John went about it. I think it was a little bit more straightforward, but I do know with something as simple as teaching the jerk, I go a lot more bare bones and just drill the footwork a lot more. Trying to think. So, I mean, just by virtue of now there being, now that remote coaching exists or whatnot, when back in the 80s and early 90s, John coached Ursula Garza Papandrea for a little while, and it was a literal mail order routine in the sense of, well, he wrote out a routine on a piece of paper and sent it to her in the mail.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it's like jotted down a month-long squat routine or whatnot with all the sets and reps and percentages or whatnot. And so for me, now my training has just my approach has evolved. Like for the people I work with remotely, I'll write their training weeks a week at a time, see how the last week went, what went well, what didn't, and then kind of base that week off the performance of the last week and the weeks prior. And just by virtue of doing that, I feel like it just gives me a little bit more comfort being a little bit more organized with those lifters. So I am trying to do that a little bit more with the lifters that I coach in person too, like maybe have something a little bit more jotted down. And I do that by medium of a computer, whereas John would write it on a notebook. He didn't know how to use a computer. Yeah. Right. And there is something me and John always disagreed on. It was where a lifter should think about sitting their balance or their pressure on the foot when preparing. And John, he was very adamant about being really far back on your heels, super far back, toes coming up. And for me, I guess I'm more of a proponent of, even if the weight's going to be more towards the heel or more mid-foot, it should always lie somewhere to where the toes or the heels aren't creeping up.
Yeah.
During a certain point. But
I think most people would agree with you there.
Yeah, and he would show me a couple of lifters where it's like, look, like their toes are creeping up off the floor, like as they're preparing for the jerk. And I remember we wouldn't like almost come to blows or anything about it, but it would just always end in an argument that neither of us would give on. And I know that's like kind of like, let me step back and say like, hey, like that's a legend and I respect the heck out of him. And it sounds silly coming out of my mouth saying, well, I agree with him about something, but that was something I just saw a little differently on. But so those are things off the top of my head. But I will say his way of coaching and his way of training athletes, like it's just looking on it, like I definitely took most of how he coached people, and I just use it. And I may use cues a little bit differently or explain things a little bit differently, but my approach, whether it's teaching someone how to snatch or clean and jerk or preparing them for the meet, it is very, very, very similar.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I was just going to say, we had Max Zeta on yesterday, and he was talking about calculating average intensity, the number of lifts, and trying to collect as much data as possible to inform decision making.
Even like the skew of intensity.
And then you're talking about like
the skew of it.
How flexible John is, and we've been having a discussion about how flexible you can be, what you can get away with, how much you can change on the day, and it's just interesting how much variation there is.
Yeah, I recall reading this in one of the, there are so many Soviet manuals that I have no clue. It may have been one of the yearbooks that Bud Charniga sells, but I recall and this stuck with me, but one of the authors writing that, well, tonnage, we don't feel that the training should be guided based on increasing the tonnage each week, but we do feel it's just a good indicator to look at in the past weeks to kind of get a feel for how much the athlete is doing. But that shouldn't be like a determining factor in guiding the training. Like, okay, we need to do more tonnage this week. And so that kind of stuck with me. But yeah, with John, it was a lot more rudimentary in the sense of, well, hey, let's just take it day by day and play it by feel. The lifter, they seem to be a little bit more explosive today. They're moving well. They're keeping good habits. They seem to be in a good mood. Let's push it more. Or say a day that's a planned heavy day. Well, the lifter, they feel like shit. They got a flat tire on the way to the gym. Their girlfriend broke up with them. Maybe we shouldn't go heavy today. Or they're just not moving well. Or they keep banging the bar off of their hips, and their cleans keep crashing on them. Then maybe today isn't the day to go about it. But he would always be very big on taking things day by day, playing it by feel, just having a very generalized idea of how you want the training week to go, but like just using common sense and taking what's there in front of you and working with that for the day. Which, of course, there has to be some kind of framework and some kind of progression. And he would be less day by day or playing by feel with the squats. I know with that he did like to be a little bit more concrete. Like, all right, we need to go up 5 kilos from last week on the squat to this. But with the lifts themselves, they definitely had a lot more flexibility in the weights you were going to handle, the sets and reps that you were going to handle, and so on and so forth.
No, sorry about that. I just had to mute my microphone because there's like scaffolding and drilling. I don't know if you guys can hear it, so I keep muting it every time I'm not talking. But anyway, I think we've run past the hour point of the show, so let's start wrapping this one up. Ed, where can people find more about you? Can they come and train with you? Can they get coached by you? Where should people go?
No, I don't coach anymore, and I'm just going dark on social media. No, yeah. So I'm located in Marietta, Georgia, and we welcome drop-ins. If you need some coaching, we definitely allow that too. Our website is voodooweightlifting.com. Our Instagram is at Voodoo Weightlifting, and we have a Facebook page, but we are not on Twitter or anything else like that. So yeah, Instagram, and we have a website, so you can reach us there. If you care to look at my personal Instagram page to see an older guy trying to get back into weightlifting, it is Baconator105 on Instagram. Nat Aram actually gave me that nickname. So
that's cool.
It kind of stuck as well. Yeah. So yeah, you can find us there, and if you wanna kind of see the inner workings and us trying to build a women's team in our facility. So
awesome. Well, we appreciate it so much coming on and sharing these stories about Karlovic and Niku Vlad and John Coffey and all of these awesome things that you've been able to see and hear during your weightlifting career. Of course, guys, you can follow Josh at Josh_Phil WL. That might be the third time I've gotten that wrong this week. That's PHILWL on Instagram. Follow me at Seb Ostrovich or at Weightlifting House. And guys, we really appreciate you tuning into this week's episode. You can catch us all on the next episode of the Weightlifting House podcast.